Buenos días a todas y todos quienes están aquí presencialmente y quienes nos siguen a través de YouTube, el canal de FLACSO, una de nuestras redes sociales favoritas, no la única, y cada vez habrá más. Y estamos hoy aquí reunidas para... Perfecto. Para escuchar la conferencia del profesor Oscar Mazzoleni sobre Why and How Populism, por qué y de qué manera el populismo, Conceptual Issues and Empirical Analysis. El profesor Oscar Mazzoleni es un especialista en el análisis del populismo. Yo voy a permitirme leer una muy breve semblanza de Oscar. Es un amigo de la casa también, un colega con el que estamos pensando seriamente en llevar adelante múltiples actividades académicas, investigaciones colaborativas. También es como un amigo de nuestro colega Manuel Anselmi, que fue de alguna manera el nexo que nos permitió conocernos con Oscar, que es profesor de Ciencias Políticas y Sociología Política en la Universidad de Lausanne, en Suiza, una hermosa ciudad de Suiza que tuve la oportunidad de conocer, de hecho, hace algunos meses. Sus principales intereses de investigación son el populismo, la política de los partidos, los desafíos democráticos y todo esto también desde un abordaje territorial. Sus artículos, digamos, más importantes tienen que ver con el tema del populismo, Populism and Key Concepts in Social and Political Theory, de 2023, Territory and Democratic Politics, A Critic Introduction, 2024 en Palgrave, y The Radical Right Demographic Populism, por aparecer en 2026 o ya aparecido. Y además, Oscar es una autoridad en el tema del populismo porque es editor en jefe de la revista Populism, ¿no? Por lo tanto, Oscar, de verdad, it's a pleasure for us. La conferencia será en inglés, pero tendremos oportunidad, obviamente, de comentar en español. Oscar entiende bastante bien el español y entonces nos da la oportunidad de que nos podamos expresar en español y él pueda responder en inglés. ¿Ok? Les agradecemos a todas y todos por estar aquí y a ti especialmente, Oscar, y al doctor Nelson Arteaga que nos generó o mejor dicho, generosamente nos permitió este espacio en el marco de su seminario doctoral para llevar adelante esta actividad. Bienvenido.
Gracias, gracias por esta amable invitación a FLACSO. Estoy muy agradecido al profesor Nelson Arteaga, el director de la escuela doctoral, y al el profesor José del Tronco. Lamento no poder hablar en español, lo siento mucho. No obstante, estaré encantado de escuchar sus preguntas en sus idiomas, en español. So thank you very much. I'm sorry. I have to move in English because my Spanish is not enough to deal with this kind of topics. So that's my question. Why and how populism in contemporary democracies? So, okay, that's better. Okay. Gracias. This topic is, of course, a theoretical topic. It's not an empirical topic. I do not present empirical evidence today, but I'm not a political theorist. So this approach or this reflection started some years ago because in my studies, empirical studies in political science, political sociology, I discovered as a kind of uncertainty. I found some shortcomings from a theoretical, conceptual, epistemological point of view when I address questions related to populism. So that's the reason, because I start to make a reflection, theoretical reflection, but always in relation with the goal, analytical goals, in order to build maybe a different way to study empirical populism. But first of all, I would like to underline why populism, why is it relevant? Because many scholars say, finally, that ubiquitous, vague, unuseful. And yeah, maybe. I'm not a defender of populism itself, because I think we have to be agnostic to some extent in order to say, okay, that's a way by which scholars used to work on some topics. But also, we are part of a history or a multiple dimensional history, because populism has a different legacies, different traditions, and we have always to be aware on that. Populism as a notion develop, grow in different historical moments and in different historical system. And that's I think always important to have this in mind when we try to deal with this notion, because it's at the beginning already, so that if you look at the history of 20th century, the end of 19th century and all over 20th century, and you move on different continents, regions, so you are always you meet this idea of common meet, anti-elites, claiming something about charismatic leadership, something about anti-establishment. And this, of course, is related with the history of populism in the United States, in Russia, in Latin America, but also in some countries in Europe. And this is the reason also, because of our difficulties to find commonalities apart from some elements, or from few elements until today. And of course, this picture is complicated also because nowadays we observe, this is important to, we observe as a political scientist, we observe as a sociologist, we can also observe as anthropologists, because it's an observation. There is many scholars convinced that populism is something real, something important to use in order to understand realities. There's a massive academic production, and we observe and the development of subfields. So people work on populism, and that's more and more. That's is an empirical observation. And then we observe at the same time in a public sphere, in political struggles, in electoral campaigns, in media coverage, the use of this notion. So the success is amazing from this point of view, but the success is first of all a social phenomenon and academic phenomenon, and also in relation with the different the uses of this notion in the history. We have also the use, analytical use to some extent, is adopted in many countries, in many continents today, and some people they talk about global populism, and of course this is related with the fact that we have this
complex situation. On the one side, we have a very flexible concept that's part of the game. So it's this concept is so complicated because there is no consensus within the academia about the definition of populism. And there is also no consensus also because there are now more and more disciplines using populism as a notion. Not just the political science, political sociology, but also political psychology, history, of course, philosophy, geography, and that's anthropologist. So there are many scholars with different perspectives, different epistemologies using this kind of notion. And finally, this create a kind of confusionary maybe perception. There is a lot of perspective, a lot of definition at stake, and in connection, or more or less in connection, this kind of the populism used in the media and in political struggles, and creating the idea that populism is first of all, a normative, a polemic notion, and not an analytic notion concept. That's also these difficulties. So there are many definitions, scientific definition, but also a complex relation with the normative connotation of the concept. And of course, here I don't know if you know some of these definitions, depending on if you are familiar to this topic, populism. And there are many definitions, and there is a kind of a struggle in terms of legitimation, in terms of economic recognition, which is the best solution or the best definition in order to understand populism today. Scholars, they say populism is a thin-centered ideology, or others say no, it's a discursive logic, and the other they say no, it's a political style or performance, and then other again populism is based on the leadership and the strong leadership and the personalistic power. This is some of the main definition in political science. In political science, no, and yeah, political sociology, and also political theory, of course. But if you move on other disciplines, there are other definitions. But then, what about how we can use that? Because the problem is we can decide that, oh, there is no consensus, so this concept is unuseful. That's often the consequences, or the consequences, and of course also this skepticism of part of the academia about the notion, because there is no consensus, because it's a strongly normatively embedded, and at the same time, that's the problem, because of this massive increasing of studies on populism. We have to recognize these studies deal with some of the most important issues in the democracy, and in relation with democracy and globalization, or the big, strong transformation. Today is used in order to understand how anti-establishment movement and parties work, have success, how democratic distrust and grievances emerge. Populism is related to social frustration and inequalities, especially when we try to explain voting behavior, support toward the so-called populist parties, the reaction against globalization, and also populism is also used by scholars because we observe, not only in Europe, but in many countries, also in many continents, that the traditional ideological families, socialism, communism, related with socialism, communism, liberalism, also fascism, are undermined, are in crisis, are transformed in something different. And we don't know exactly what this different is, so we label that populism. When we don't know exactly what happened, is it something about populism? So is a solution? Maybe no, maybe yes, but is adopted. Look, example for left wing. So the crisis of socialist, radical socialism in the 80s and 90s. So the alternative to social democracies in the world started to talk about left-wing populism or radical left-wing populism, because there are some in Spain, Podemos and other countries. Yes, we started to talk about populism, and sometimes populism is adopted as an official word in order to justify and to legitimize the new party. But at the same time, they are connected with socialist tradition in between. So it's not completely connected. Mélenchon in France and other, and we can move on different examples. So we are in this trade-off. On the one side, many definition, no consensus, very normative embedded, and the other side used in many situations in order to try to capture, to understand social transformation, crisis, challenges for the democracy. That's it. And then we can say, okay, please find something different. Another solution, an alternative. Yeah, maybe, please, let me know. And that's the question. That's this phenomenon, as I said before, is difficult to avoid. And look, for instance, in a book published in 2025, this is just a number of mention of keywords on Google and Google Scholar. So populism in general, populism in Latin America and United States, in Europe. Look how many citation. So in Google Scholar, so that's amazing. Then there is an increasing number of citation each year, last 20 years. So that's okay. We can say these scholars do not understand anything real. They just talk about populism, but we need something different. Maybe yes, but I think in my opinion, we have to deal with this reality, and we have to deal with populism. At least in a moment in which we have not a strong alternative, but strong alternative, we can talk about that. And this aspect is also, as I mentioned before, related to the fact that we cannot avoid the fact that populism is a part of the political struggles. Act of naming a party as populist or leaders implies many consequences in terms of legitimation, denunciation, stigmatization of the actors, and that's part of the game. That's part of the issue. As my thesis is, we cannot avoid this phenomenon. Although in academia we think to be outside of that. So we say, okay, we write in a paper, we write in a book in academia, and we use this term, and then outside there is people that use populism in the media, etc., to legitimize their own behavior. They say this is a populist because demagogue, etc. And then you say, oh, that's not my concern. But you cannot escape of that. The connotation, negative, positive connotation, in my opinion, is part of the problem, because we participate to some extent to this construction, to some extent, also because some political scientists, I don't know here, but in Europe, my country, we are often interviewed by journalists. They say, oh, please let us know what you think about this party, this populist party. What do you think about that? We are part. We participate to the public construction of political parties and leaders, and also we contribute to this to the legitimation of these parties. And of course, we are here to talk about the future of this the possibility to rethink maybe some shortcomings, some limits, and to accept maybe to think about how we can move beyond some shortcomings. Although we are in this context of scientific vagueness, normativism, and how we can build an analytic use of populism, under which condition we can do that. I think that's important to say that many scholars, especially in political science, think there is no necessity to rethink populism from an epistemological, theoretical point of view. They just say we need empirical studies to be much more robust, to have new data, to be more stronger in comparative. So the solution is increasing and institutionalization. So that means that more publication, maybe more journals, more books on that. And this is, to some extent, the way to build a scholarship. The idea of populist scholarship. Say, we recognize we are part of a community, and finally we accept some basic idea, and we don't need anything about a strong epistemological, ontological reflection in order to think about some shortcomings, some limits, some contradictions in populist studies. My aim here is just to give you some, to submit to your judgment, also to your opinion, some alternative proposals. So I have 4 here alternative proposals in respect the mainstream vision in populist studies, political science, political sociology in particular. I have these 4 claim or 4 proposals. The first is to take advantage of analytical pluralism in definition along with conceptual clarity. So there is the idea that without consensus, no science. Without consensus about the concept that you use, no scientific use is possible. That's, I go in depth on this point, but why that? Why we cannot just accept pluralism? My idea is that this pluralism is an advantage and not a problem. Second, making a combinatory specific oriented analytical views of populism. So populism is not to use alone, is always connected with a complex of phenomena. Nationalism, fascism, authoritarianism, left-wing, right-wing, etc. We're not just about populism at itself, but we have to be careful that not only populism can take different meanings, but also can evolve, can be combined in order to better understand social and political realities. And the third point is being careful in taxonomic use of the notion. This is a populist party. This is a populist leader. Also, it's a complicated element because often we decide this is a populist party or leaders before clarifying which kind of definition we have, because we follow the flow of the media, we follow the flow of the public opinions as a scholar. And I think is a bit problematic. At least we have to be aware of that. In this sense, the fourth is the polemic uses of populism should be an object of this of the use of populism, and it should be a part of the studies of populism. There is already scholars working on that, how politicians, leaders, journalists use populism as a notion hype in the public sphere. That's should be more recognized, in my opinion. So just going in depth on these four arguments. So in political science, but also in sociology, there is a strong influence by Giovanni Sartori. Giovanni Sartori is one of the most influential scholars. He wrote in 50s, 60s, 70s, and especially he is an authority by now regarding the concept formation. Concept formation is a very specific word and topic usually avoided by people who work in empirical way because it seems too abstract, but it's not abstract at all. For him, we need an unequivocal association between words and conceptual goals. The golden goal is to have one word for each meaning. One word for each meaning. Populism should have one meaning. Without a common semantic core, a minimal universalist, a concept is not viable for political sciences. The definition should be enough general, universal, in order to travel in different contexts, in order to compare cases. A conceptual stretching, he said, occurs when a concept doesn't fit with some cases, because these cases lack of one of another necessary component of the concept, because the concept should be minimal but sufficient and necessary. So if you say, give you another example, democracy, because Sartori worked on democracy, and they say, well, we have to define what democracy should be or is in a universalistic way. So give some component that appear in all democracy in the past and the present. So minimal definition of democracy. And if some of this component lack in a case, this is not a democracy. If you follow this rationale. For instance, you say, okay, democracy in Robert Dahl, for instance, definition of democracy is so free elections or free election and free public opinion and the possibility to have an open competition among candidates in order to win elections. But of course, that should be the minimal definition. But maybe there are different definition of democracy. And the question is when, for instance, there is a lack of open, completely transparent public opinion, is still a democracy or not? Look, in contemporary world, there are many countries we have electoral elections and apparently respected. But is this always the case? And if you lack one element, it's not a democracy at all. If you follow the rationale by Giovanni Sartori, it's not a democracy at all. So there are scholars connected with Sartori and criticize Sartori on that. Say, no, please, there are different possibilities to talk about democracy. There are liberal democracies. There are also authoritarian democracies. There are many possible nuances in democracy, and maybe not all general definition or universal definition is able to travel in time, for instance, across time in the history. And that's the problem, no, about democracy. In my opinion, this is the problem is also related with populism. Also, is in a similar way. But the issue, the first problem of this kind of way to look about the concept formation is the fact that in social and political sciences, same concept refer to different realities and context matters. So the problem is the polyphony. The problem is democracy. We talk about democracy. We have probably 5 definitions of democracies. And the problem is you use this term, but this term is also embedded in our vision of world. Is connected with our history, our biography, is connected with the context in the country we live. It's difficult to use these terms in a unique, universal way, and creating consensus. That's the problem. Can have plenty of that, but you probably have plenty of minimalist definition, but probably the consensus is difficult to build. And this is the issue, because some scholars say, oh, populism is a polemic concept. That's the reason, because we have avoided as in the use of the populism is an analytical way, because it's so polemic. But look, if you look at in social sciences, there are many cases in which you have the same problem, because we use in the social sciences, in general, social political sciences, that concept that are part of ordinary language. We cannot escape from that. Mm-hmm. And there is a problem that is difficult. The plasticity is in there are in linguistic philosophy, in cognitive science, in political scientists also, the sociologists, has tried to see how it's complicated to define in one way with clear borders scientific concept in an uncontroversial way, because these concepts are moving. And the question of, for instance, about the definition of democracy is because also the normative point. We define in free elections, but look, and values, the values underlying democracy are important or not? If you decide is not important, there are some consequences, no? And that's also the question of how you can limit this kind of difficult to interpret in one way, only one way, this concept. So at the same time, I think we have to take seriously in account the problem of the conceptual stretching stressed by Sartori, but using that in a different way. So that's my so the idea that we have to accept, to recognize there is no one thing univocally be populist, but a plurality of things. The question of things is ideologies, discourses, communication styles, regimes are different things. They're not things. Democracy could be an institution, a behavior, a value, different things. Do you want to choose? Of course, you can choose. But look, do you really think today that you can defend the idea that democracy is only regime, is only institution, is only value, is only behavior, and excluding the rest? Why populism is different? Populism can be also the same. Populism, depending on your research question, you can observe different aspects of the reality. Ideology, discourses. Look, you have coming back to empirical studies. So if you want to study the ideology of a party, what you look manifesto. You look electoral manifesto, the program of the party, and you say, okay, you can observe that, and then you observe the ideology of the party. But when the leader start the campaigning, or candidates start campaigning, maybe it is not the same. They spread out discourses that's not completely in line with the ideology, official ideology of the party. So there is a differences. You cannot just look, if you look at the social media post, probably are not the same than the program. In each of all the parties are the same. So you look at the discourse, or you look at the ideology. And then you look at the way by which the leader is able to sell the message. in terms of behavior, that's also another thing. But do you really think that's only of one of them, of the thing, is populism? Or is a way to understand populism? That's the question. And in my opinion, this also related to the specification. Give you an example. Donald Trump. Donald Trump is president of the United States, has been elected as part of the Republican Party. Opponents say he's a populist. So opponents say he's a fascist. Opponents say he's a revolutionary. Well, do we really need to choose one of these labels in a priori way in order to understand why he's successful, why he's able to sell his message, why in some part of the US, the supporter of MAGA supporting nowadays? Do we really need to choose one of these labels? Because we think we defend that it's Republican, it's revolutionary. No, maybe the reality, in order to understand, to understand is exactly the analytical goal. It's not here to be, to say, oh, Donald Trump is against democracy, or Donald Trump should not be elected again. No, it's a question of why it can be successful or not successful, why he failed, why he's successful. And in order to do that, maybe you need a combinatory use of concept. That's the challenge. Does not mean that you have to avoid a political judgment or normative judgment. Not at all. But I think we have to distinguish the two levels. In this sense, I think it would be great to distinguish not just normative and analytical, because there is no clear borders. I recognize this aspect. We can discuss later on it. But we have in order to move away the Sartorian view of each aspect, each component of the concept should be present in all empirical case, we can also say, oh, maybe this is a mainstream leader, is a mainstream party, but it used some element of populism in terms of discourses, style, etc. That's also a possibility. And then you can imagine an ideal type. You can have a potential list of component of a definition, discursive definition, ideological definition, charismatic definition, what you prefer. And then you check if in your empirical case you find this element. And you think you address the question in terms of gradualism, and not in yes or not, 0, 1, but in terms of gradualism. And you can find full-blown or light populism at a certain level, a certain aspect. And this is much more useful in terms of in analytical way, because the scope is not to use the notion as a weapon. But of course, why not? But in this case, it's not very specific oriented analytical uses of populism. It's real to go beyond what I call essentialism, because there is no one unequivocal thing that we can call populism, but probably different dimensions of social and political and cultural phenomena that can be addressed with the concept of populism in order to understand some aspects of this phenomenon. So left-wing populism is not populism, it's left-wing populism. So we are the left-wing component, the radical right, the same. National populism, conspirational populism, economic populism, epistemic populism. My friend, Carlos de la Torre, with whom I publish different stuff together, say, oh, but if you justify all these specific uses, the impression is that we are in a confusionary situation, because populism is everywhere. Populism is used in many contexts. not just left-wing radical, right, but national populism, conspirational populism, medical populism. You know, medical populism, you understand medical populism is emerged as a topic in a COVID period because attacking medical power against the will of the people. That's also the studies medical populism and epistemic populism. Epistemic populism is the attack against science, because science and scientific knowledge is criticized because it's perceived as part of the power of the establishment. And then you build your own research question, your own frame specifically on that, and not in a generic way. You do not study democracy. You study liberal democracy in the reality, in a contradiction in different countries in different moments. And probably you do not study democracy in general or liberal democracy, but you study how elections work, or how civic culture exists or are important in a context and another. How elites, political elites, selected in electoral domain are able to bargain, to create compromise, or to polarize system. In this sense, this book of Levinsky on how democracies dies is an example of that. So mixing institutional and cultural aspect of civic culture of democracy in order to understand the capacity of democracy to sustain, to continue, or to decline. Here, you observe one specific element, one specific aspect of the reality, again. And in this sense, I think I'll give you an example. I hope, please let me know.
Yes, 3 minutes.
3 minutes? So I'm okay. 3 minutes, I have to move on. I have an example, but on conspiracy and populism, and I move on, and very, very short. I'm going to talk about very briefly about party labeling. So the point is here, in the history of political science, but in the 20th century, but also today, we have parties, they have a clear label. So liberal parties, socialist parties, and communist parties, Christian democratic parties, and so on. But there are some of these parties that are difficult to describe, difficult to label. And you use the term of populism. And we observe also in academia, often the label populism is used as taken for granted. It's not discussed. We talk about right-wing or left-wing populism, populist parties, but we don't know exactly what it means. We say, it's usually, the scholars say, yeah, usually in academia or in public sphere, these parties are classified as populist. But the question is also how real you can select, you can define, you can classify this party as populist, because there are many, many consequences, though, normative consequences, but also the fact that if you say this is a party in a context, it's a populist party, implicitly you say the other are not populist. That's also one of the shortcomings, and also you follow this kind of political uses. Often there's a populist because in a public sphere there is a dominant view, because this party is a minoritarian party, is an anti-establishment party, and also often considered a populist. So you reproduce this idea. And then you're difficult to distinguish between uses, polemic uses, analytical uses. And also another point is the fact that parties are not just manifesto. The problem is the parties are not just manifesto of the party, not just the electoral program. It's a representatives, leaders, grassroots members, some of members of the government in a coalition system, coalitionary or in a proportional system. You have the elected member of the party. They have to moderate the discourse. They are moderate. They cannot do the same that the leader outside. So, and you have to take the factionalism. So the difference, the internal of the party maybe the party is more extreme, more radical than or moderate. And you say, this is a populist party, but do you think it's a populist party? Although there are different stream, different wing internally, and there is divided. And then how you can deal with this diversity? That's the problem of the exact. And I have no time here to go inside, but I have written a paper on that. You have to be much more careful about this. It's important to define populism and ideal type, in my opinion. And then, so be aware that you can reduce political parties at the official messages, and also to consider this the fact that parties are not homogeneous. And the selection of case, you have to go inside the party and to look the party inside with quantitative, qualitative data in order to know how members at different levels share what we can call and define populist discourses, ideology, etc. And in this sense, the labeling should be much more careful, and in order to avoid shortcomings, normative shortcomings. Again, about the use of the populism as a thing to study, it's important to do that in media studies, but also in sociology, how journalists are labeling parties. There is a tradition of media populist studies. I think it's very important. And this is a point. The labels are often treated as self-evident, especially in the journalist coverage. That should be, in my opinion, an object and a topic of analysis for political scientists, sociologists, and communication studies. In this sense, the question is, under what condition does populist operate as a stigma or a tool for political normalization, legitimation? That's, in my opinion, an important point. So to conclude, I think populism is not just a concept, and hype in sense of a weapon, in rhetoric weapon in public sphere, but also a multidisciplinary research field. We can avoid it as a concept or as a research domain, although an increasing number of scholars adopt this concept for interpreting worldwide dynamics. And that's the fact. And we have at the moment probably not a lot of concept that can substitute populism in order to understand what global transformation and global challenges. Dealing with some shortcomings of the literature, I try to address some specific element and to address some challenges, and try to share with you this reflection in order to boost, maybe to improve the analytical use of populism. Thank you very much for your attention.
Gracias, Oscar. Muy provocativo y muy, creo que propositivo para promover el debate y las preguntas. Yo no quiero monopolizar mucho la palabra, solo quisiera hacer algunos comentarios vinculados con tu presentación y algunas preguntas que son detonadoras, digamos, de una discusión más amplia que podamos tener aquí. Lo primero es, de alguna forma, establecer como justamente los términos del debate a partir de lo que Oscar nos propone, ¿no? Y creo que su provocación, su propuesta, su trabajo tiene una primera pregunta fundamental, y es cómo podemos hacer desde las ciencias sociales para lidiar con los múltiples usos del término o del concepto populismo, ¿no? ¿Por qué? Porque estos múltiples usos tienen un riesgo, ¿no? Y el riesgo es la vaguedad con la que solemos usar o aplicar ese concepto al análisis de diferentes diferentes fenómenos sociopolíticos, ¿no? Y creo que quizás la pregunta que está detrás de la propuesta de Oscar es cómo producir conocimiento social cuando no hay un consenso en torno a un concepto tan utilizado, tan popular como es el del populismo, ¿no? Creo que es un concepto mucho más popular que la misma realidad que intenta denotar, ¿no? Es mucho más popular el uso del populismo que el populismo como fenómeno, ¿no? El populismo como fenómeno no es tan popular. De hecho, suele ser objeto, digamos, de usos peyorativos, de críticas, ¿no? Se suele usar para reducir o para bajar o para subestimar aquello que se está adjetivando, ¿no? Y me gustó, Oscar, cuando nos propones una aproximación agnóstica del término, es decir, antes de tomar partido, antes de creer o descreer, tratemos de acercarnos al fenómeno y sobre todo de acercarnos a los múltiples usos del fenómeno, ¿no? Si entiendo bien, Oscar no nos está diciendo, hagamos como Sartori, definamos el concepto y luego vayamos a la realidad a ver por dónde está ese concepto, qué consecuencias tiene, cuáles son los factores que lo producen. Más bien, analicemos los múltiples usos del concepto y tratemos de identificar, si te entiendo bien, Oscar, los parecidos de familia, ¿no? Como esas cosas que parecen estar presentes de una manera quizá diferente, pero siempre están ahí, tanto cuando definimos una política pública, o adjetivamos o categorizamos una política pública, o un partido político, o un gobierno, o un líder. Parece ser que detrás del concepto de populismo hay elementos que podrían ser comunes, digamos, a las formas en que adjetivamos las características o el actuar de un partido, de un gobierno o de una política pública, etcétera, ¿no? Una primera pregunta, Oscar, que quiero proponer, digamos, para la discusión, tiene que ver con el dilema de identificar fenómenos sociopolíticos como el populismo sin tener previamente un acuerdo en torno a qué significa. O sea, yo estaría de acuerdo contigo en que las propuestas esencialistas, por decirlo así, o categóricas como las que propone Sartori, quizás no son del todo útiles, ¿no? Pero ¿cuál sería la alternativa para establecer un piso común o qué elementos son propios del populismo que nos permitirían crear un consenso en torno a que parece que estamos frente a eso, aunque no estamos seguros? Digamos que con cierta probabilidad dicha política o dicha decisión o tal estilo de comunicación o tal ideología se parece, ¿no? O pudiera ser caracterizada o catalogada como populismo. Lo segundo es que yo creo que las ciencias sociales, en términos epistemológicos, son eminentemente inductivas. ¿Qué quiero decir? We are theory builders, not theory testers. At least initially. Es decir, analizamos información que nos ofrece la realidad, la sistematizamos y construimos conceptos a partir de ese análisis, ¿no? A partir de la existencia de esos conceptos podemos ir a ver a la Sartori, digamos, o de una forma más hipotético-deductiva, en qué medida la realidad, digamos, se condice con ese concepto. Pero en el origen, los conceptos son resultado de una aproximación más inductiva, o al menos a mí, que a pesar de todo hago mucha análisis cuantitativo, me gusta pensarlo de esa manera. O sea, yo soy alguien que se ha vuelto más cualitativo desde su origen cuantitativo, pero más por una reformulación epistemológica, ¿no? De lo que yo creo que son o deberían ser los procesos de producción de conocimiento de lo social, ¿no? Dicho de otra manera, necesitamos conocer más la realidad para poder sacar conclusiones de la realidad. Proponer postulados medio teóricos para luego ir a ver qué tanto esos postulados generados aquí en la comodidad del cubículo se condicen con la realidad y luego cuestionar a la realidad porque no parece coincidir con lo que estamos imaginando, no me parece una buena manera o no me parece una manera ideal de hacer ciencia, y por eso reconozco la validez de tu propuesta, porque creo que tu propuesta va un poco en ese sentido, ¿no? Lo último, para ya darle la palabra al público presente, que desde una perspectiva populista reconozco como los más importantes de este espacio. Y volviendo a esto, yo decía, el populismo es un concepto muy popular, es muy utilizado, ¿no? Desde fines de los 60s, todo lo que es la teoría de la agenda setter, del establecimiento de la agenda, propone que los medios de comunicación son un actor fundamental, no solo en la construcción de la agenda, sino en la construcción de imaginarios y de sentidos comunes en torno a los fenómenos sociopolíticos. Y la conceptualización o el uso de términos que hacen los medios de comunicación también son formas de, no sé si de generar conocimiento, pero sí de generar consensos en torno a ciertos conceptos, ¿no? Y hoy en día, eso que antes, digamos, ese proceso del cual antes solo participaban los medios de comunicación, ahora también participa la misma gente, los ciudadanos, a través de las redes sociales, ¿no? Es decir, el conocimiento social debería ser también resultado de la observación de esos procesos, ¿sí? ¿Y en qué medida, la pregunta, y entonces ya doy la palabra, en qué medida deberíamos como investigadores, como gente que se dedica a tratar de construir conocimiento de lo social, en qué medida podemos ignorar o en qué medida debemos incorporar todos esos nuevos sentidos comunes en torno a conceptos como el populismo, que están presentes, están diseminados en el debate público, aunque sea un debate polarizado, confuso, ¿no? Pero está ahí, es el debate, es lo que la gente entiende por estos conceptos y propone. ¿Qué tanto impacto debería tener eso, impacto real, en nuestra propia labor académica, ¿no? Para ser incorporado luego a nuestros trabajos aquí en las aulas. Entonces, bueno, ahí hay 2 o 3 preguntas que a lo mejor te provocan reflexión, pero me gustaría nuestros colegas que se animen y hagan sus propios comentarios. Gracias.
Gracias. Muchas gracias, doctor Oscar. Soy Alan Mosqueda, aquí estudiante del doctorado en mención en ciencia política. Mi trabajo va enfocado hacia el antipopulismo, entonces es de alguna forma eh, interesante porque yo mismo he tenido como mucho conflicto con respecto a la definición de populismo y honestamente al principio de la investigación estaba muy renuente a utilizar la categoría justo porque es muy abierta, muy difusa. Entonces sí tengo todavía varios cuestionamientos, o sea, 3 principalmente sobre la propuesta que nos hace. O sea, uno es, a final de cuentas, creo que incluso considerando esta nueva reconsideración de Sartori, es como ¿cuántas cosas sí podemos llamar populistas o populismo? O sea, porque dentro de la tradición ideacional también ya se está enfocando mucho a estudiar hacia las personas. Entonces, como también las ideas son populistas, o sea, de ellos digo, sé que dentro de esa tradición claramente sí, pero es como entonces un ciudadano puede ser así tal cual populista, ¿no? O sea, como no es ya líder, ¿no? O sea, porque es algo que he notado mucho dentro de la presentación, o sea, que está muy enfocado hacia como los líderes políticos y los partidos. Em, y por otro lado, una curiosidad que tengo ahí o sea, que no lo he podido responder, supongo que hay que hacer un trabajo de ahí de historia conceptual o algo por el estilo. ¿Por qué no utilizar la palabra demagogia? O sea, como en el sentido de que, pues, un concepto nos puede dar un significado en específico. O sea, ¿por qué se ha apropiado populismo como de una forma como tan amplia? Demagogia ya se perdió. En teoría son sinónimos, así. ¿Cómo los podremos distinguir? Y en ese sentido o sea, la pregunta central es, ¿qué sí es lo que comparten todas estas cosas que son populistas, ¿no? O sea, ¿qué sí, o sea, porque incluso tomando el ejemplo de la democracia, creo que sí uno puede, así de uso común de la palabra, podría decir, pues me suena que es algo relacionado con el gobierno de la gente, remitiéndose a lo mejor a una definición etimológica, pero, o sea, en este caso es como, pues sí, ¿no? O sea, ¿cuál es la base común de la palabra populista como para que podamos hablar de todas estas cosas, en todos estos diferentes enfoques? Y por eso y bueno, por otro lado, quería hacerle una pregunta tal vez más como del campo, de los investigadores que se están enfocando en esto. O sea, si entonces si sí es una actitud que tienen los investigadores de asumir este enfoque que yo tengo para entender populismo o esta definición que tengo excluye a todas las demás? ¿O no es algo que ya hacen también los investigadores así de, pues sí, como hay tanta gente hablando de populismo, pues entonces debe de haber varias cosas que podamos llamar populistas, ¿no? O sea, un poco la pregunta es ahí, ¿no es algo que ya está haciendo el campo en sí? O sea, como asumir que hay muchas cosas populistas y que hay muchas formas de estudiarlo, o si de plano la actitud es tal cual, no, yo no le creo a Mude, ¿no? O sea, a, a él no sé, o sea, es una curiosidad, supongo. Gracias.
Can
Yes.
I respond maybe?
Yes,
Otherwise,
yeah.
very shortly. Then, yeah. So thank you. I think there are a common question here about the common base or common ground or common meaning. Yeah, I think, of course, we need something. I always give you analogies because I think in order to distinguish populism or the other concept, I think you are always be connected with the limit and also the strength of the pluralism in social science. Capitalism. Look, what is common to all the definition of capitalism? You say, yeah, something about economy, market. No, market. No, because yeah, but this is a secondary because exploitation, entrepreneur, private property. So what? Yes, it's something around that. But is this what is real the common ground? The commonality is a kind of family, a kind of family resemblance. So there are something similar, some in common, something close to, but we don't know exactly what is real the common ground, because we can discuss a lot on that. But if you have Marxist, Schumpeterian, Weberian, there are different ways to understand the core concept, the core dimension. And here, so there is another way to talk about the radial approach on concepts. So do you think we define one core element? Of course, populism
is about people, power, about antagonism against elite, something. But it's very, look, Casmude say, when you talk about minimal definition, introduce sovereignty, general will, corruption, many aspects, very precise aspect. But nobody talk about populism just about the defense, the power of people and against something, enemies or something. Because always you put some other aspects. So in Arato, for instance, of ideal type list, in the sense there are different dimensions, but many others say, okay, there are this aspect, but in reality they develop around. So the minimal definitions in the literature is not a minimal definition. And then you say, you know that because yes, I have your answer, clear answers. Is about the difficulties of the power of the people in relation with democracy, in relation with enemies, elites, etc. Something about that. But then when you started to use that in an analytical way, it's not enough. It's a kind of common ground, a family resemblance in Wittgenstein award is the same as capitalism. When you start to study capitalism in an analytical way, you cannot say, yes, in between Schumpeter, in between Weber, in between Marx. Yes, you can, but you can develop something coherent. You can merge, for instance, the populism as a communication style, with the discursive conceptualization of populism. You can combine populism as ideology with discourse. So you can combine, but you have to be aware you are combine definitions, different aspects, and because you have to look at an heterogeneous and complex reality, and then you can combine. And you look the same for capitalism. You have a history of capitalism. If you are Weberian, you do not follow the same that Marxist. And you say, yes, but there is something common. Yes, there is something common. But when you move on an analytical way, you cannot, this kind of common ground, it's unuseful. It's unuseful. It's just at the beginning. You start with that because you talk about populism. Yes, of course. But when you move on the analysis, you should be much more precise. And Casmude said, minimal definition is about sovereignty, about general will, about corrupted elites, and people should be homogeneous. This is just precise. And with this, developed an analytical frame. That's it. And when you move on, look at the Kurt Weiland approach on strategic populism. Yeah, there's a personalistic view, but at the same time is the way to ban any intermediate powers. So it's again the embodiment, the leader embodying the power of the people. And again, it's something different. No, it's about the power of the people, the anti-elites, etc. But it's not consistent with the definition by Casmude. But you have some familiar aspect, but not from an analytical point of view, just for an impressive. And that's the difficulty of the argument. I think it's this dilemma. No, you should agree on something. Yes, you should agree on one aspect. You think that democracies face some crisis, and this crisis is dealing with the power of the people and the power of the elites, and the antagonism to some extent about people and elite. But then how you can define the people, how you define the power of the people, is it homogeneous, not homogeneous? How you can define the role of the elites, the role of the power, the party, the leader, is different. Then when you move on the analytical way, you have to choose what you want to study. What's your research question? What's your sources and the data that you analyze? And then you move away. And that's and I think that's for the other question about that's the question of the populism, how we include the media, role of the media and social network. I think I mentioned before, I think that's the importance is on different levels. One is to see to what extent, and there's a Gianpietro Mazzoleni, they are not family connection. He's a well-known scholar, the founder of the media populist studies. And he many publication in this kind of topics, communication studies, political communication studies, and he say media logic is the part of the media functioning because they dramatize, they simplify, they put at the center dramatic languages. Also, the leaders they are able to polarize. That's the coverage. That's one aspect. The other aspect could be, as a political scientist, to study how, in different contexts, you observe the public uses of populism. I give an example. I give in a comparative way, for instance. Give an example. So if you go in UK, there are some analysis made by scholars, especially on The Guardian, the newspaper, The Guardian. The Guardian tried to grasp the anti-Brexiters parties movement, and they say, there are populists. These are populist. But the analysis is also related to the fact by these scholars that using populism there is a kind of banalization because there are also extreme right parties. The same in France. We have the Front National, Rassemblement National. For a long time, there are a kind of struggle in academia and say, this is an extreme right party or the populist party. That's interesting to see how, depending on the use of this word, the notion of populism, you can be stigmatized or legitimizing. In the case of UK and France, could be the case, but at the same time in France you have the party of Mélenchon, the left. So the idea that the people say no, some scholars say we cannot use the same word because we compare a left-wing and a right-wing party, and then using populism you create a kind of commonalities where, and then you say so you create a artificial commonality. This is an important point. How you can do that? How the media work on that? How the politicians use that? I give you an example, concrete example. Mélenchon, in some situation, spoke against Macron, say, "You are a populist because you are a plebiscitarian president. You want to embody the power of the people through a constitutional reform, undermining the parliament." And then, some days afterwards, Mélenchon say, "We defend populism because we are close to the people." So, that's, they introduce different definitions. And that's interesting, which kind of definition they use in order to legitimize or stigmatize. That's interesting. And again, it's about when you in the public sphere, I think it's the same in Mexico. You say, okay, but which kind of definition, underlying definition, is at stake when this journalist, this politician, use this notion addressing this specific leader or party? That's interesting. Can be a research question in a study in academia. That could be a possible. I give you another example. US today, Steve Bannon, one of the most important supporters of Trump and part of the MAGA movement, said, "We defend national populism, a national populist view." National populist, because in US there is appropriation on the left and the right across the 20th centuries, because there is a grassroots progressive populism, and the people defend that Sanders and others, they defend this idea against the uses by the radical right. And then there is this aspect of how, to what extent this battle around the notion of populism reflect a broader polarization. That's another research question. So that's very concrete. I hope so. And I think, yeah, to go back to this aspect of also the more theoretical, yes, I think, yes, we have theory builder. I think, but the problem is that in populist studies, especially in political science, where there are much more than other discipline growing part of the literature, a lot of research, empirical research, we forgotten that you are inductive. You are forgotten because you say, this is the definition, and we apply this definition, and at the same time, this definition in the ideal approach, Moodian approach, is often used in an exclusionary way. And this exclusionary way, in my opinion, is difficult because you avoid other part. And I give you a much more concrete example about this is a political psychologist issue. I work on with survey and the scales on populism. I published something about that. And about that, there is a strong plural debate about what is a good populist scale when you try to grasp public opinion, the attitudes of citizens toward populism. How you can, which kind of scale, kind of questionnaire, which kind of items you use in order to grasp, understand populism in a public opinion. There is a strong debate. And one of the issue in this debate is populism a unidimensional or multidimensional scale aspect? So is these attitudes define a unidimensional attitude or an underground attitude, or is a multiple dimensional? And if here is a Sartori, it's exactly Sartori. Sartori said you need all the components together, so it should be unidimensional. Otherwise, there is no populism. But and then the reality, you never find this solution. Often you have to manage data in order to see, and there is no possibility. And depending on the context, certain items work and others don't work because there is the meaning of the same items change depending on the context. And then you say, oh, if this item doesn't work, so populism doesn't exist anymore in this country where the item doesn't work. That's strange, no? I don't know if I have.
Thank you.
Please.
Bueno, gracias por venir y hablar de temas que es del populismo. Y en primera tengo un comentario porque me parece muy interesante poder definir populismo. Creo que es una cosa que hay un montón de definiciones, populismo vacío, antipopulismo, cosas que realmente son difíciles de comprender, ¿no? Pero yo me pregunto algo, a pesar de que es verdad de que se necesita un gradualismo, cuando usted hablaba de la democracia definida por Dahl, por ejemplo, desde el punto de ideacional se plantea una base mínima de lo que debería ser democracia, ¿no? Entonces, esto evidentemente no tiene que ser homogeneizado para todas las regiones. Cuando uno habla de democracia, se fija que tiene que cumplir las bases mínimas a pesar de las diferencias regionales, ¿no? Y si alguna de estas se sale, deja de ser democracia. Y esa es cierto que muchas veces se caen estos errores cuando se hacen análisis, ¿no? Sin embargo, hay algo que es importante, que dentro de esta definición mínima existen umbrales para saber cuán democrático es, y ese es el punto central de lo ideacional, ¿no? Entonces, van a haber democracias más cercanas a lo ideal o más alejadas de lo ideal. Entonces, esto del gradualismo que propone usted, que es muy interesante, ¿no caería en algún punto en reforzar la sobreproducción de ideas, de investigaciones sobre el populismo? O sea, yo siento que un problema de no poder generar consenso sobre lo que es el populismo es el miedo a la crítica moral que se pueda tener si alguien dice que el populismo tiene que ver con una deficiencia de cómo las mayorías ejecutan sus actividades políticas, ¿no? Porque justamente las críticas a las democracias liberales son que los presidentes y los gobiernos hacen todo sin escuchar a la mayoría. Pero ¿qué pasa cuando se toman en cuenta las mayorías? Obviamente también hay problemas, ¿no? Entonces siento que una dificultad para poder generar consenso en el populismo es aceptar que no siempre las mayorías tienen la razón y que no siempre los presidentes van a hacer bien las cosas, ¿no? Entonces aquí me pongo a preguntar también esto para mí, para usted, para todos, ¿no? Yo creo que el populismo es un fenómeno enmarcado dentro de la democracia. ¿Por qué? Porque todo lo que se identifica, como por ejemplo las mayorías que están por encima de minorías que también tendrían que ser escuchadas dentro de una democracia, la instrumentalización de las mayorías por parte de los gobernantes, son ya bases mínimas para entender el populismo. Pero más bien creo que el problema de la sobreutilización del término es que se confunden consecuencias del populismo con el populismo como tal. Por ejemplo, el tema de la comunicación política, que habla de muchas cosas y muchas veces piensa que, por ejemplo, que hay una polarización entre dos polos, entre dos grupos, es parte del populismo y realmente no, o sea, es populismo como tal, pero no es así, es una consecuencia de que se esté presente el fenómeno del populismo. Entonces, ahí tengo esta idea, ¿no? O sea, tampoco, o sea, está bien ser graduales, pero considero que caer en polisemia va a generar los mismos problemas que plantea usted, ¿no? O sea, las bases mínimas siento que están dadas de manera no explícita, están ahí, pero pues no nos atrevemos a decirlo, ¿no? O sea, no nos atrevemos a tomar partido o a tomar una posición clara de lo que es el populismo, justamente porque vamos a estar en estas contradicciones de lo que es políticamente correcto y lo que no es políticamente correcto. Y esto también yo lo he vivido aquí, ¿no? Que muchas veces con compañeros del doctorado que estamos en la mención en ciencia política, yo me pongo a pensar en mi país, yo soy de Bolivia, y veo cómo Evo ha generado muchos problemas a nivel institucional y demás, pero es justamente por estas mayorías que son instrumentalizadas. Entonces un compañero me dice, pero es que eres antimayoritaria. No soy antimayoritaria, pero creo que hay problemas con esto, ¿no? Entonces, creo que es necesario poder tomar, o sea, no sé si lo correcto sea dar una definición inequívoca y única, pero tampoco creo que se tiene que descartar tener una base mínima y en función de esto hablar de lo que decía el profesor, ¿no? Del tronco. La inductividad tiene que ver con tener una base mínima, pero no descartar los casos si no se cumplen ciertas cosas que uno espera. Entonces ahí va mi pregunta, ¿cómo se toma en cuenta la existencia de diversas corrientes en la creación de teoría? Porque si vamos a hablar de pluralismo y de polisemia, entonces, o sea, no sé cómo se podría aplicar, porque tiene que haber una base mínima incluso para generar diversas corrientes. Respecto del capitalismo también, ¿no? Sí es bien difícil como que hablar de qué es, pero todos sabemos que en una lógica capitalista, la idea es la tendencia de generar ganancia en función de una forma de propiedad privada, o sea, hay bases mínimas. Entonces, ¿cómo lidiamos con construir una base mínima y con evitar caer en la polisemia y que podamos aplicar todo esto a los casos en función de las regiones? O sea, siento que también es tomar en cuenta lo histórico, cultural, o sea, es realmente muy difícil construirlo, ¿no?
I think it's a good point, good question. I think I have my answer is looking on a specific definition of populism. When you listening your question, I have two authors. One is Nadia Urbinati, and another is Paul Blocker. Nadia Urbinati exactly said, oh, the hyper-majoritarianism is part of the democracy, is a kind of extremization of democracy, and she addressed that as populism. So for her, populism is not just an ideology, a discourse, is an institutional form. And this is another definition, because when in the core of this definition is the tension between the power of the people and the rule of law. The rule of law. Because the rule of law is the defense of minorities. The defense of individual rights against the decision of majority when they try to undermine the minorities. And in the hand of government or populist governments, regime, etc. So this tension is exactly that. So there is Paul Blocher developed a theory, published a lot as a judicial sociologist, published a lot on constitutional populism. Constitutional populism is the way by which is developed is a step further on Urbinati. Say there in populism there is in a populist view there is the idea that there is no division of powers. All the powers should be expression of the will of the people, and toward the leader, but toward the laws, toward the power of the judges. So everything should be based on the power of the people, and any constitutional counterbalance should be avoided, because but it's the idea that the people own constitution. This is the way, so it's a specific way to study populism, in my opinion. Is a constitutional populism, and is not, but you cannot escape from the fact there are other scholars, they say, no, populism is ambivalent because it's both for democracy or anti-democracy, etc. So the question is, in Urbinati say, no, when you are in the power, you transform and you reduce the freedom and you destroy or you erode liberal democracy. And others say, no, it's in between, because Mood and Calvasio say, no, it's open, it's could be democratic, but also, and that's how you can fix that. How you can fix that? I give another example. There is a comparative studies made in 20 years ago, trying to use a minimal definition of populism, a minimal definition of democracy, and try to compare between Europe and Latin America. And that's amazing for me was because one of the case was the Austrian case, Austria in Europe. And at this moment, there is Haider was the leader. I don't know if you know this name, the Haider leader of the Freiheitliche Freedom Party. And using the minimal definition, no concern about democracy at all in these countries, but this party boosts anti-immigrant policies. And you say, oh, but it's not about elections. You know, look, the normative consequences of this minimal definition of democracies is huge. So that's, in this sense, I think it's difficult to to follow, in my opinion, in a consensual, because there is no consensus. Consensus doesn't exist. I'm sorry, you are maybe nostalgic, but there is no consensus in social sciences, probably no consensus in democracy, and risk is the democracy itself, as you can see, maybe not far away from here, the minimal basic behavior or values is also undermined. So the point is, I think there is no chance to have a consensus. Why do we need the consensus? Pluralism is so hard, it's so nice. Populists probably doesn't like anything about pluralism, because there is one people, and the people should be or the majoritarian, or the majority of the people is the people, or is it homogeneous from a national ethnic point of view? But in any way, pluralism, why not? And depending on your research question, probably, I don't know, from my point of view, I think if you need to be, if you use, if you need to develop or you need to boost heuristic capacity of this notion, you have to avoid consensus, because there is no avoid, because it's the complexity of reality. It's a Weberian position, of course. You can never achieve you never achieve the reality as such. You can never meet reality as such. You meet only the complexity, and the complexity you meet only through concept, and you choose what you prefer, or depending on your values, and then you analyze the reality from this specific point of view. It's a Weberian point of view. I recognize. But I think Weber is also the author about the differentiated society. Society in modern society is based on different values, a diversity of values in society. Yes, probably is a normative point of view also. But I think if we want to take advantage of the advance of the analytical approaches in different of Moodian approach, a discursive approach, and others. If you want to really to recognize the validity of all this research, you have to accept plurality. Otherwise, you abandon, you avoid an aspect very important to understand this phenomenon. That's my personal position.
Me parece una buena manera para ir cerrando, Oscar, la necesidad de una aproximación pluralista de las ciencias sociales o hacia las ciencias sociales. Me queda la última pregunta en ese sentido, y es una pregunta que es un poco quizás disruptiva, pero que es una pregunta que yo también me hago, y es, en ese sentido, ¿cuál es el aspecto científico de las ciencias sociales? It's a matter of methods, of tools, porque no es un tema de resultados, no es un tema de enfoques, ¿no? Hay muchos enfoques y los enfoques dialogan. La pretensión es, no sé si decir imponer, pero sí la pretensión de los enfoques es tratar de describir la realidad de acuerdo con sus postulados de una manera más cercana a la realidad. Pero esos enfoques van a estar discutiendo y debatiendo todo el tiempo, ¿no? ¿Cuál sería el aspecto científico de las ciencias sociales? Si no es como en las ciencias naturales, por ejemplo, que las cosas bajo las mismas condiciones suceden siempre de la misma manera. Entonces, ¿cuál sería el aspecto científico en ausencia de un consenso intersubjetivo? Porque yo por lo menos identifico dos elementos en torno a la producción de conocimiento científico. En primer lugar, voy a hablar de conocimiento científico social. En primer lugar es que los postulados se verifiquen empíricamente, ¿no? En diversas condiciones, que puedan navegar, ¿no? Y el segundo es, y para mí es muy importante, que exista un consenso intersubjetivo al interior de lo que es la comunidad científica, de que eso efectivamente es conocimiento. En ausencia de ese consenso, entonces, ¿qué nos queda?
So my opinion is you have I'm very pragmatic. There is some methodological tools that we can use in a robust, coherent, deontological way in qualitative and quantitative analysis. This should be consistent with the definition that you have from a conceptual point of view. It should be consistent with the data that you gather. And I don't care about the fact that we are close or not too close to natural sciences, because natural sciences are very, very, very pragmatic too. If you know the work by Latour and other scholars, the sociology of sciences, they show there is many approximative way to work in the natural sciences. And I don't believe really in cumulative way, because a cumulative knowledge is a part of the illusion, because for two reasons. One, there is an inconsumable, there is the difference between context are so strong that any variables cannot grasp that. You can choose your variable then, but you analyze the reality through these specific variables. And also when you build your variables, depending on the context, you are obliged to adapt your, for instance, the data gathering. For instance, if you compare different countries also in Latin America, you need probably to adapt your questionnaire, because you have to say, this is a proxy. Proxy, what it means proxy. Proxy is kind of, for me, is a God concept, proxy. You have to believe in God, because you can justify everything with proxies. There are some jargon. I know this jargon, but I think it's a kind of jargon. It's purely based on the kind of belief. So it's a God. You believe in God. You believe in proxies, because you say yes, it's a proxies of. But look, you using proxies. You have just to recognize the fact that contexts are so different. And you cannot compare immediately, because you have to to make a judgment based on a belief. These same items, that not same items means the same stuff, but mean the same stuff. You don't control that. There is a presupposition. There is some assumption that you have implicitly. In this sense, I think there are many shortcomings. You cannot just, in this sense, you cannot just to say, because we apply methods, recognize methods, then the result is able to grasp reality itself. You just have a good model in order to publish your article, but it do not mean that you understand really the reality. You just apply good a model with a good stuff, and there are people around you, the community of scholars, say this is a good proxy. I'm sorry, but this is I'm sorry to be so agnostic and maybe not enough believer. But this is one of ways. So proxies are the worst stuff that we have, because we have to recognize first the diversity. In this sense, maybe much this capacity to travel. Yes, you travel, but what travel? The travel is the generic concept. And then when you move on empirical, there is nothing in the travel. You need to adapt. Otherwise, the people don't answer to your questionnaire, because they don't understand what you are doing, what you are thinking, or they interpret in another way, misunderstanding. So the misunderstanding, the polysemy. So what you look, if you say corrupted elite, do you think really between different countries, the people think the same stuff? Corrupted? What did it mean, corrupted? Sorry. Corrupted means you take money, or you are not honest. You are not. You think on your own interest. You are. That's what it means. That's. Yeah, please.
It's limited. I mean, even though that you have different. Thank you.
Even though you have different definitions about the example, corrupted elites. Yeah, maybe different context gives you different information about how to apply that concept and all that, but it's limited. You don't think about corrupted elite. Yeah, it means that leaves are falling on the floor. I mean, there are some. I believe that's what means that the concept travels, is that they resonate in some way to the people, and they give you some kind of orientation to how to interpret reality or something like that. But yeah, it's like I'm more of the Wittgenstein tradition of kind of no, parecido de familia and all that, but I don't know. I believe that we can. The problem here is that there's a lot of relativism that it just goes everywhere. So I don't know.
No. It's a controlled relativism, because you need to define in your research, so your concepts, your research design, your data to be consistent with your methods. That's it. It's nothing relativist. It's recognizing we are not religious people, because there is no, you have to show the consistency of that. And it's an empirical, transparent process. But of course, is a middle, so there are a debate in the 50s. I don't know if you, maybe the 50s, the 50s. There are a strong debate between Parsons, which is the big name in sociology, and Merton. It's a middle range theories. That's the point. It's a middle range. You have not to justify your case in order to interpret the rest of the world. You interpret your cases, and you have to be careful about generalization. Of course, you can generalize from a theoretical point of view. You can say this is a good way to address the same topic, the same issues in another context. But it's difficult to compare, and also just not because it is difficult to compare institutions across the world, or mean historical meanings, the meaning of some notion, corruption, etc., across context. But because also, that's another key point, the transformation of the so-called populists. So look, you cannot just to say, oh, Morena party, we study Morena party. No, you have to talk about the history. You have to, different step, different moment, the same for all the parties and the leaders also. How you can take this in account when finally, apparently the party has the same program, but in reality, they have different agenda, they have different discourses, they have different leaders, they have different styles, but apparently the ideology is the same, because the program is not really changed. So how you can deal with that, with this different asymmetric point? That's the reason also, because you need probably use different definition in order to grasp this internal diversity. That's it. And that's but you need a research question on that if you have no research on. So for me, the definition depends on the research question and not vice versa. That's the point. It's a choice, because if you have a definition as one definition and you think this is populism, you have some specific research questions and you exclude other. In my opinion, you have first of all to choose your research question depending on the context in which you live and the relevance of the issues. If you want to study, so the judicial reform in Mexico, probably it's much more useful some specific definition of populism than others, because you can grasp better, because this aspect is relevant. And you say, oh, but in some definition, judicial power is not relevant, because you talk about political elites. Political elites. So not judges, but judges are elites too. And so how you can manage that? You need a specific definition of judicial populism, for instance, or constitutional populism. There is a scholar, they work on that. That's it. But it's not the populism in general. No. It's not democracy in general. No. It's not capitalism in general. No.
That's it, y no es poco. Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you.